intensive exams are the ones that aren't fun. Well, none of them are fun.
Well, no, none of them are fun. This is least fun.
This is least fun. So we call this the last level of exam. It's very intrusive. This is usually done at a customs exam site or a CES. They will, basically what will have to happen is that container will have to be moved from the port to a CES, and then that CES will usually devan the container. They might segregate it by house bill so that if customs flags something for an intensive exam and it was really just one of the house bills on that container that they wanted to look at, they will know exactly where to go. And they will make that product available for U.S. Customs to inspect, take samples, whatever needs to be done. This one's not quick. It is going to take usually about a week. If you've got a decent CES, if they're not backed up, 2 weeks is not uncommon. The bad news is that there is no amount of time that they have to get this done in. And I think that that's something we were going to talk about a little later, but now is kind of a natural time for that. There is nothing keeping customs or a CES from holding onto that container until they can get to it, whether that's 2 days, whether that's 3 weeks. I have honestly seen exams go on for 6 weeks. Sure, it's not the longest it's ever happened. I don't think we want to talk about records.
Boy, that's up there, though.
But it's possible. And you can kick and scream with customs, you can kick and scream with the CES, but at the end of the day, if customs isn't coming out and examining that freight, they're not letting it go. And that's obviously a big problem with importers. It's impossible to plan for. It's unfortunately one of the prices of importing, one of those unknown costs that you need to be able to account for in some way, but it is something that you need to be aware of, that there is not a limit on how long that can take.
Okay, let's talk about the exam only fees. Let's talk about all the other fees that might be involved with moving that container to the CES, because those fees that you see right there may not be the only fees that you are required to pay in an intensive exam.
Absolutely. So what will happen is usually sometimes the port will arrange the move themselves to the CES, and then they'll arrange the move back from the CES back to the port. In those situations, what will usually happen is you will get a kind of an all-in-one bill. It might break down the charges by, you know, this is what you paid the trucker, this is what you paid the laborers at the CES. But oftentimes we will just get a bill that says exam, $1,700. And we would have to fight to get that broken down into what the individual parts are. The fees, so let's say if you were responsible for getting the container to the exam site, or your broker or your forwarder, whoever you elect to do that, if that, depending on the port, is what happens, your broker or your forwarder will hire a trucker to dray that container to the exam site. So you'll have a dray of, you know, $400 or $500, depending on your port, depending on your trucker. You will have fees to unload that container, so labor to unload the container. You will likely have storage with that CES, because if it's there for a long time, they're not just letting you take up space in their warehouse for free. And you will have fees for reloading the container, and then you will have a fee for draying that container back to the port. So that's just the exam itself. You can also potentially have what's called detention. Per diem is what it used to be called. The steamship lines have mostly updated their terms. They call it detention now. You can start actually accruing per diem or detention because that container has been out from the port for so long on that exam. So just like if you have a container delivered direct from the port to your door and you let it sit in your door for a week and a half, you're probably going to have a couple of days of per diem or detention. The same thing applies here, even though it went to a CES and it wasn't actually available for you to unload. So you can have hundreds of dollars in per diem or detention, and that has to be paid before they'll even release the container sometimes. It's one of the ugly sides of these exams. I think I can count on one hand out of all the times that I've done an exam like this that I've ever been able to convince someone to waive any part of those fees. And usually it was because the steamship line screwed something up. If everything went as planned, they're probably not budging on that.
Hey, Caleb, I've got a couple other questions. When they're taking those products out of the container, if they are perishable or require refrigeration goods, is there the proper storage at those CESs?
Usually if you are moving things in, let's say it's a 20-foot or a 40-foot reefer, the CES that they send it to should be equipped with the equipment to make sure that that stays at whatever temperature. They might have more of a general cooler rather than one that they can set at the specific temperature for, something that's USDA might have to be between 5 and 12 degrees Celsius. They may not have the facilities to do something that specific, but usually the CES that they send it to will be equipped enough to at least keep it in a cooler environment than ambient temperature.
Okay, perfect. And then you had mentioned before about different house bills on a master. So let's talk about that in like LCL terms. How does an LCL shipment moving through an intensive exam work?
So basically what's going to happen there, the process itself is going to be exactly the same. They're going to move it to a CES. They're going to unload it and segregate it. Customs is going to look at what they want to look at. And then once that is all said and done, those charges from the CES or the port or whoever bills those out, that's going to be prorated across that entire master bill, basically by how much space in that container your shipment took up. So if you had one pallet and a 40-foot container, your exam fees for that are going to be pretty low. But if you had 20 CBMs in that 40-foot container, you're going to be paying a pretty good chunk of those exam fees yourself.
So basically what you're saying is just as you buy LCL freight, you share the cost of the container with other importers. And even though your shipment may not be the one that's flagged for exam, you're going to share those costs based on how much size it takes up in the container with everybody else in that container.
That is correct.
Awesome. All right, let's move forward.